Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
My first guest needs very little introduction to you. He's a PhD, he's an Islamic scholar, he's an author. You often see him on Press TV. He writes for Veterans Today. I'll give you plenty of links to his work and to his books while we're chatting to him. It's very timely that he's on the programme. Let's welcome back our good friend Kevin Barrett from Madison, Wisconsin. Kevin, welcome.
Hey, it's good to be back with you, Richie.
I said timely, didn't I? We've had the British Foreign Secretary in Westminster today having the goal to stand up in front of his peers and talk about the need to have negotiations that will result in the removal of the Assad government in Syria, because we really need to get rid of the Assad government, he said, and I'm paraphrasing him, but this is what he said, in order to defeat terrorism in Syria. While he's saying that, bunch of baloney and provable, demonstrably provable lie that is, the Saudi Arabian military rained hellfire and damnation down on a village in Yemen again today, which resulted in the deaths of loads and loads of children, as has been admitted by the Western media, the BBC, AFP, AP and Reuters. Children, Kevin, and those bombs raining down on those Yemeni kids originated in this country because they were built here and sold to the Saudis. Do you ever reach the point, my friend, where you actually genuinely consider just walking away from it? There's no point. Why are we talking about this?
Well, it's even worse than what you just said, Richie, because U.S. and British advisors, quote unquote, are right there as they're launching those bombs.
In the control rooms, Kevin.
That's right. They're in the control rooms dropping cluster bombs on Yemeni children. And, I do have to walk away from it every now and then, briefly. I garden, and it's gardening season again here in Wisconsin, USA, which has a Siberian climate. We're having a super warm March for the second time in 5 years. So I've already got lettuce and chard growing in the garden, starting to come up, and I get out there and work on that. I have a pine forest I have to take care of, and so I'm stripping the bark off pine trees, knocking them down with chainsaws, moving them and stacking them, things like that. So that kind of activity, plus playing basketball with my son and chess and doing homeschooling, reading Dante's Inferno with my other son. I actually do have a life outside of the world of fighting the horrific abuses that are going on. And if I didn't do those other things, I would go nuts. I couldn't do this 24/7, 365. If somebody wants that, they're going to have to program a computer to be a conspiracy theorist computer or something, and then it'll never have to take a break. It'll never have to sleep. It'll never have to do anything except spew out the truth about these horrible things that are going on. But I can only do that a few hours a day, not all the time.
Tell me, you might not have come across this. You're a few hours behind us, but the former television news reporter Michael Burke, who was famous in Britain for being for having reported from war zones around the world. I think he's a pretty stand-up guy, at least what I remember of him anyway. And he wrote an article today in the Radio Times, Kevin, which is like the TV Guide in the US. It's a, you probably know this, it's a BBC. It originated with the BBC. It's a TV and radio listings magazine. But he wrote a magazine basically talking about how absolutely pissed off he gets with the likes of Emma Thompson, the actress, with Benedict Cumberbatch, with celebrities flying into war zones and famine zones, doing their thing, talking a bunch of nonsense and then flying out. That got me thinking about you and things we've discussed in the past. How important to the cabal are celebrities? Likes of Angelina Jolie today. She was in Lebanon today talking about the need for, the need to do more, the need to take in more refugees, the need to do this, the need to do that. How important are the celebs, Kevin?
Well, the regime today functions really largely through the power of media. There's sort of three legs to this power, New World Order power cabal. The media, the finance, and then the muscle or the bullets and bombs. And they all work together. The media is probably the most important one because they condition people to essentially act as cogs in the machine or slaves of the elite. And so these stars, these superstars in the media become sort of substitute friends for people as we are all being atomized and turned into disconnected individuals, utterly alone in this bleak, consumer culture landscape. We have these imaginary friends, the celebrities that we follow on our media, and they have an inordinate hold over our lives. And so when those celebrities are out there doing things that reinforce the power of the cabal, it has a big effect on us. It's just absolutely true. And so they are able to suck them in and get them on these allegedly humanitarian missions, which are, of course, anything but. They're part of this system that is preying on the whole planet. I've read some great descriptions of this system, Richie. I'd like to just briefly plug.
Go ahead, Kevin.
You all know John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He has an updated version of that great book out, describes how he used to go around the world strong-arming the leaders of countries into taking usurious loans that would never be paid back, so that the international banksters at the World Bank, IMF, and so on would grab all the resources of these countries. And if the head of the country wouldn't accept these usurious loans, then they would send in the jackals or the asteroids, the assassins who would cause a plane crash or bring on cancer, as happened to Hugo Chavez and so on. So anyway, Perkins' new book is must reading. And then secondly, there's a great new book by Douglas Rushkoff. Douglas Rushkoff is the guy who wrote the book on Judaism that I totally identify with. I mean, I'm a Muslim, but I'm also a Jew to a certain extent. If you take Rushkoff's version of Judaism, yeah, sure, I'll be that. Anyway, he's got this terrific new book out on the way that the corporatocracy is really this kind of software that's running to extract value from everything and concentrate it in these bigger and bigger sorts of corporate structures. And so I hit that. I'm forgetting. What's the book before this, which was this essentially a precursor to this, is called Life Incorporated. And maybe the name of this new one will come up in a moment. Anyway, the guy's a must-read. Douglas Rushkoff, Rushkoff.
Yeah, John Perkins has been a regular guest of mine over the years, and like you, I've read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and it's never been laid bare as well as John laid it bare, just what guys like him did on behalf of basically, financial institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, basically plunging countries into poverty by taking debts that they were supposed never to be able to pay back, and then as you said, then installing puppet governments. And when those loans couldn't be paid back, well, the real wealth of the country was basically siphoned off. We see that today in Europe, of course. It hasn't been accomplished using military force in Europe, but it's exactly the same thing. Greece and Spain and Ireland and Portugal and Italy have been plunged into debt that they'll never be able to pay off. And we're just giving away the real valuable state-owned, people-owned assets of those countries in lieu of those debts. It's horrendous, Kevin. And we have a media, which I used to be pretty happy at one stage, Kevin, to talk about the media in very unflattering terms. I used to be happy with that. The media is this, the media is that, and I would say things about the media. Having grown up in commercial mainstream media, I'm not sure it's sufficient anymore, though, because I think the media, especially stories run in recent days by Sky News and the BBC, absolute outright lies, stories about what's happening in Syria, that I've taken to saying a lot lately that the media is now, it's a clear and present danger to the well-being of the people in Britain, the people in America, and so on. And rather than just say the media is terrible and laugh at what it does and mock it, we need to be taking it a bit more seriously, Kevin, because it's becoming more and more blatant and aggressive in what it's doing to support the cabal and the heinous things that we see. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I've been blasting at the media for more than a decade now, and I've taken some lumps for it. At times I've pointed out that the media coverage of 9/11 here in the United States amounts to participation in crimes against humanity, mass murder, and high treason. And so these media people who are not doing their jobs or who are doing their jobs if their job means covering up this crime, they're doing it all too well. These people are all technically guilty of all of these capital crimes. They could end up swinging from a rope. And, I think that the people against me, when they heard that kind of stuff, put out a lot of propaganda saying, oh, Kevin Barrett, he wants to go hang all the reporters and journalists. And, I would say, well, no, I would start with, Rupert Murdoch and the people at that level, and then move down and offer some truth and reconciliation for the people willing to be rehabilitated. But yeah, these media people are very much what we're told that people like Leni Riefenstahl and Eichmann, the Nazi propagandists were, of course, considered to be complicit in the war crimes of the Nazi regime. Goebbels, of course, notoriously ended up, I think, committing suicide before he could be grabbed. But we're seeing a whole mainstream media that is absolutely as guilty of these same kinds of crimes as Goebbels ever was. And
yeah.
I hate to say that, but it's the truth.
But they are, Kevin, and they're nasty as well. I've tweeted a few of them, and I've gotten a couple of responses back. I've tweeted Sky, I've tweeted the BBC and Channel 4 politely. I'm always polite, I'm never rude. And I said, can you explain to me why you haven't attempted to do an in-depth expose of the Islamic State by way of interviewing one of its leaders? Why aren't you Skyping with one of its leaders and getting him on the air? You know that whoever started the Islamic State, we know, of course, they were funded, armed and trained by Western intelligence agencies to deliberately destabilise Syria. We know this. But the fact is, they were lunatics to begin with, and they've taken the ball and run with it, and they do what it is they do. So I've said to the mainstream news organisations in this country, so let's see them, because they want us to believe that ISIS has a military objective. So it has a political objective. That's what they want us to believe. Its political objective is to form a caliphate in the region. So that's the political objective. And that basically ISIS, the lunatic jihadists, are the military wing. You could almost say like the old IRA, but anyway. I'm not making any comparison now between the IRA and ISIS at all, but that's the way they used to talk about the IRA. A group with political ambitions using the military to do that. So I said, why don't you get these guys on? I've also tweeted them and said, why don't you invite Vladimir Putin on your programs? Why do we go to RT to hear Putin? Why are you not interested in speaking to Vladimir Putin on Sky News, on prime time, to put to him the very things that the propaganda type stuff that you say about him on a daily basis? I got one or two replies, Kevin. They were unflattering, as you probably would expect. But I'm trying to alert people to this. You must think, even if you think people like Kevin Barrett and Jim Marrs and David Icke are crazy, you must begin to wonder why your news organisations are not seeking interviews with these people. And they just won't answer it. And of course, I believe the real answer is because if you get Vladimir Putin on the air on Sky News, or if you get some guy who's heavily involved with Islamic State operations, you're obviously not going to be able to control that, and it's going to be terrifying because they might say something that lets the cat out of the bag. What do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I would love to record an interview with Caliph al-Baghdadi on Truth Jihad Radio. So if you're listening, so-called Caliph al-Baghdadi, you can contact me through my website, which is truthjihad.com. It will be back up shortly, we're hoping. It's been hacked by the usual vandals, but we're going to get it back up. Anyway, Baghdadi, he had the run of Camp Bucca, where he was incarcerated for more than 5 years. The official U.S. military story is that they held him for like a year and a half or something. But in reality, there are people who were there, including guards, who say that he was there for 5+ years. And during that time, he had the run of the camp. He had some kind of special privileges. He could go anywhere he wanted. And he was organizing things and talking to people in that camp. And there was a reason why he had those privileges, because ISIS, which he was then starting to set up, the nucleus of, was part of the official plan. Now, the role of ISIS, Richie, is really obvious if you have any background in the Islamic studies and the study of today's Muslim world. Muslims, by about a 60 or 70% majority, would like to see a caliphate reestablished, meaning a transnational Islamic political entity, maybe like the Common Market, or the EU, something like that. They want a political unity. And that frightens the bejesus out of the banksters who rule the West, because an Islamic political entity would not allow usury. So the banksters would be frozen out. It would have control over the world's energy supplies, and it would probably be going to a gold-backed currency of the same kind that Gaddafi was trying to start when they whacked him. So that's what's up, is we're seeing a false flag caliphate. That is a bait and switch. The best way to control the opposition is to be the opposition. And so they created a fake caliphate, which is really a Western intelligence operation. ISIS is not an Islamic organization at all. It's a Western intelligence operation. Its purpose is to discredit the totally legitimate desire of the majority of the world's Muslims for a caliphate. And boy, are they ever making the idea of a caliphate look bad.
I agree with
you. It'd be a great idea.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a great idea. We could debate that another time. Our politics, I think, are different. We do agree, of course, that ISIS was created by Western intelligence agencies to deliberately do exactly what you described there. But there seems to be a lot of them, Kevin. And that moves us on to something I wanted to tackle you about. Because I read you, of course, and all the links to where you can find Kevin will be tweeted out presently. By the way, you know where to find Kevin anyway. Your website, Kev, is Truth Jihadi. Give us that website again. I have it written down.
It's Truth, not Jihadi, but it's Truth Jihad.
Excuse me, that's right. TruthJihad.com, folks. TruthJihad.com. You can read Kevin directly there. Don't listen to somebody misquoting Kevin Barrett. Find out what he's saying from the horse's mouth, as it were. But look, there seems to be plenty of these guys, Kevin. When Western intelligence agencies want to use lunatics to destabilise Syria, they seem to be able to find them easily enough. Now, I'm not casting aspersions now on the Quran or on Islam. I don't do that. Leave that to idiots like Donald Trump. I'm not getting into that. But what I would say is there are a lot of people in Europe terrified at what's going on the Greek-Macedonian border, what's going on in Calais, and what's going on elsewhere, because they believe, and their worries are not unfounded. Now, admittedly, you have groups like Britain's First, and you have groups like the English Defence League, horrible scumbag racist thugs. They have no place in any debate, lunatics. But you also have people who are not racist, like me, for example. And I live in a community, I'm actually on the right, on the left, not on the left or on the right, on the left and on the right I've got Irish and English, but across the street I've got Bangladeshi people, there are Indian people, there are Pakistani people. We all get on pretty well. The concern that amongst the migrants, Kevin, are going to be lunatics is a well-founded concern, I think. And whatever we hear in the media, and like I said, whatever about the crazy right-wing groups, what do you think of those people who are terrified about the refugees coming out of Syria and Libya, terrified that among those are deliberately placed lunatics to do things in Europe, again, to further that agenda that we've been talking about? What do you think?
Well, I think those fears are grossly exaggerated, Richie. If you look at the actual statistics about terrorism, it's really a non-issue. Here in the United States, you are vastly more likely to be hit by lightning or to drown in your own bathtub than to be killed by a terrorist. And I believe the same is true in Europe, although it's a little worse in Europe. You've got Basques, you've got the Irish, and you've got a few crazed Muslims, or maybe it's actually Jews posing as Muslims. I don't know who it is. I don't know which group we want to blame, but it's really not much of an issue. I know the statistics show in Europe that I think it's 99% of the terrorism in Europe is not committed by Muslims. It's not even attributed to Muslims.
But I don't disagree now. Let me interrupt just for once, right? And then I really will shut up and give you the floor. I think okay. You, as absolutely smart as you're one of the smartest guys I've ever met. You're far smarter than I am. But I think you're missing a fundamental point here. Historically, you're absolutely right, Kevin. Historically, terrorism has been carried out by false flag exponents, people who want to blame somebody else for doing it. You're absolutely right to say that. I think there's a new tack, though. And I think this is a new plan. And too many smart people like you have seen this and have brought this to my attention. They can't live on false flags forever. So they've got to have genuine terrorism, Kevin. And one of the ways of doing that is create lunatic groups like ISIS in the Middle East. Give them, the means to go and do what it is they've done. And they've done horrendous things, Kevin. I mean, some of it has been made up, we know that. We know the Daily Mail and others have made stories up about ISIS. But a lot of it that I've seen through liveleak.com and others Is it made up? These are absolute lunatics beyond anything I've ever seen. But there are lunatics. We set them to do that. I believe that David Icke, for example, not because David is my friend, I don't want to be accused now here of, some sort of, cronyism or whatever. But because I believe it myself, that one of the plans is to open the floodgates like we saw in Germany and elsewhere. And amongst these, I'm not talking about thousands, Kevin. I believe Interpol is probably exaggerating when they say there are 5,000 lunatic jihadis in Europe ready to take up arms right now. That's probably an exaggeration. But I believe they do want to see some of these guys getting in the mass group of people to then go and do things that, they can't be called false flags because they actually happen. I think that's pretty fair. What do you think?
Well, yeah, sure, but let's look at this in context. Number one, even if this is true, the actual threat to any particular European of being hurt, harmed, or killed by any of these people is minuscule, still down in the order of lightning and bathtubs. Okay. Number two, in the larger context, there's a reason why they want these lunatics to be in amongst the refugees, the one lunatic amongst a million refugees or whatever, or trained lunatic or Manchurian candidate or whatever these guys are. Sure, they are probably sending some of these guys into Europe. They're creating false flag terrorism like the 2015 Paris attacks, and they're probably happy to see to it that there'll be more like that. Well, why is that? It's not because that they want lots and lots of Muslims to come into Europe. It's the opposite, Richie. This is a psychological operation. Stop. Let me finish.
Yeah,
this is a psychological operation to try to stop this movement towards Islam in Europe, which is a inexorable demographic movement that's happening, and they're going to stop it by creating a public relations frenzy against Islam through all of this essentially false flag terror hoopla that doesn't even pose a threat to anybody. It's all Madison Avenue. It's advertising. It's PR. It's brainwashing. It's the Matrix. You and David Icke know this stuff. You should anyway.
Well, we do, Kev, but we disagree with you because we've seen it too many times. This is an intended consequence. Of course, it's an intended consequence for millions of Muslims to be displaced from their countries and to head to Europe because it serves one undeniable purpose for them, and that is that it creates divide and conquer and divide and rule in our countries. Because while we're up in arms and hating the brown-skinned man who's come from a country that we have absolutely destroyed, while we're doing that and while we're arguing about whether he's getting more social welfare than me or whether he's better off than me, we're not uniting to fight against them. I love you and I love talking to you, but we are disagreeing on this one, Kevin. It's an intended consequence, in my opinion. They certainly do want millions of Muslims. Why do you think Merkel opened the door to over 1 million Muslims, Kevin?
Well, wait a minute. Why would they purposely send terrorists into Europe and set up false flag terror spectacles if they wanted Europeans to allow lots and lots of Muslims to come in? There have been Muslims are a growing demographic segment of the European population, and if nothing changes, that is, if the Europeans don't get hysterically Islamophobic, there will be a much greater number of Muslims in Europe with 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. It'll be a huge shift, and they don't want that. Why would they want to send terrorists?
They don't care, Kevin. They just don't care because
the terrorists are stopping this movement towards having more Muslims.
But don't you agree that ultimately the plan is for depopulation? They ultimately want to get rid of most of us, Kevin. That's something that I've come to believe. I never thought I would say it out loud some years ago, but I believe that ultimately it's a depopulation agenda, and that's where all this is heading. They couldn't give a damn, and that's why I see them loving this. This huge movement of people into Europe because of what it does. They couldn't give a damn. I mean, we know, and I'm not saying this for your benefit, but for the benefit of our listeners, that the Camerons and the Boris Johnsons and the Merkels and the Francois Hollandes of this world, they're nothing but frontmen puppets for Rothschild Zionists and for central bankers and something even more sinister than that. That's what I've come to believe, Kevin. And of course it's going to cause chaos. And of course you're going to have, a rise of right-wing extremists certainly in this country, certainly in Germany and elsewhere. And that's exactly what they want.
Yes, they're funding both sides.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it makes it so much more difficult. Kevin, I'd love to celebrate. I mean, listen, I'm an immigrant. I would love to think that white ethnic British and Irish people would engage with refugees coming into their communities, because the refugees are carrying the truth, you know? And I've said this on the radio before and I got hammered for saying it. I said I'd love to see that, you know, because the refugees know what's going on. They must know what's happened to their country and who's really responsible for it. I love to be able to think that we would unite with those people and unite against the common enemy, which is the absolutely satanic and evil cabal that is, you know, for a long time, longer than I've been alive, and most people I know going way back, have been putting this in motion, this particular plan. But we won't, of course, you know, identify with the refugees whom are coming with the real story, because they know we will fall for the, you know, divide and conquer tactics. We will hate, we will divide, we won't empathise, and the system loves it, Kevin.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But again, I really urge people to stop and reflect on why it would be that these bankster Zionists would be funding both sides. On the one hand, they have destroyed the Middle East to ethnically cleanse Greater Israel, because that's what Syria is. It's part of Greater Israel, right? So they've actually depopulated this region that they believe that God gave to the Zionists, and they've sent them into Europe, and they've created terrorists in order to, you know, to send with them. So they're also funding the backlash against these immigrants. They're supporting the neo-Nazis. Now, why would that be? Why would they fund and support both sides? Well, yeah, they want to destroy through chaos, you know, order out of chaos, world government out of chaos. That's part of it. But I also think this is an inoculation, in the same way 9/11 in one sense was an inoculation against actual Islamic empowerment. That is, you know, they could have died the death of 1,000 cuts with quote unquote terror attacks and, you know, in African embassies and they really thought that there was a problem. Certainly the Israelis have a problem with quote unquote Islamic terrorism. So do 9/11 as this big scary thing and mobilize the society against it. It's like an inoculation for them. That's what this refugee crisis is. It's an inoculation against Europe actually becoming largely Muslim, having a significant percentage of its people being Muslim. They're trying to stop that by creating these present conditions, which are going to lead to and indeed have already led to this huge backlash. Europe is going to shut its borders. Europe is much less likely now to be, let's say, 30% Muslim by 2050 than it would have been without these events, and that's the reason that they're doing it. And
I really genuinely don't believe they care. You know, I really don't. Like I said, we're absolutely united on 99% of this, but I believe they don't care. I believe you're right. It is a paradox that, you know, they're letting in, you know, all these refugees, or they're laying the ground for it, and at the same time supporting right-wing groups and fostering Islamophobia. To me, the two are not mutually exclusive. I can see why they do it, Kevin. Martin was on to say, so what is Kevin saying? Is Kevin saying that Islam is going to be the prominent religion of the world? Kevin will answer that, but I think it will be anyway, won't it? I mean, there's such a falling away, particularly in Europe anyway. Statistics are saying that less and less and less people are going to church or see themselves or describe themselves as a Catholic or as a Protestant. We're falling away from it, and maybe not as many people in the Islamic world are falling away from religion. What do you say to that, Kevin?
Well, yeah, that's true. The Pew Survey on Religion predicted that by 2050, I believe Islam will have surpassed Christianity as the religion practiced or adhered to by the most people in the world, but not by a lot. It'll be essentially equal. But I think, yeah, there are a lot of reasons for this Islamic growth, and partly it is that it's an efficacious religion. It has these rituals that actually work to produce religious experience, the fasting during Ramadan, the 5 times daily prayer, and so on. People who do that actually have it really shape their life for the better. It's the single best predictor of non-recidivism in American prisons to convert to Islam. There's a reason for that. So it has a lot going for it as a religion. And then also it preserves family values. And so people still have families, they still have children, and they pay attention to their kids, and they stick with their spouses. And so they end up reproducing more. And so there's a demographic edge to Islam as well. So yeah, for these reasons, and of course, Islam being the final monotheism, it's sort of monotheism 1.3. It includes and embraces the others. It holds Jesus up as the highest level of prophets, and essentially echoes Christianity on the holiness of Jesus in almost every way, with a couple of exceptions, so that you could virtually be a Christian and be a Muslim at the same time. There have been lots of Sufi Muslims who actually consider Jesus rather than Muhammad peace upon both of them, as their main spiritual guide.
Yeah.
So it's a much more tolerant religion. It embraces these other religions. It's a better religion for an era in which we're all in contact with each other. We can't fall back into our little tribes. So for all of these reasons, I do think it is going to keep on growing. And of course, there are forces that don't like that, chiefly the Zionists, who are surrounded by Muslims who want that Holy Land back. And so basically all of this is the Zionists pulling strings to try to make sure that they can keep expanding their control of their little occupied zone in the Middle East.
I mean, of course, from speaking to me over the years, I'm an atheist, and I've always respected everybody's rights to believe what it is they want to believe in, on the absolute basis that I don't get told what to do, or I don't have to live in a society where it's governed based on the rules or the beliefs of said religion. I've always said that. I'm a secularist, I always will be, but I absolutely respect people's rights. I'm still going to disagree with you on the importance of the perceived Zionism against Islam. I love Adam Curtis's film for the BBC when he talked about how Islam replaced communist Russia as the big threat that the neocons and those behind the cabal, behind the central banks, that's the stick to beat people with in terms of scaring them. I think Islam was convenient, but I totally understand why men and women whom are Muslims, who practice Islam, I understand why they would be terrified by a lot of what they see in the media, particularly from Donald Trump and others. And I am totally sensitive to that, but I think ultimately, there's a lot of evidence that Islam has just been taken as, well, we can't threaten them with, the Red Menace anymore in Russia, so Islam will do. And I do love Curtis's film on that. Kev, I'm going to give you the last word. Truthjihad.com is Kevin's website. This is a terrific commentator, folks. Very important. Get on there. And on truthjihad.com are links to Kevin's recent books, particularly his book about what happened in Paris, which, of course, is a monumental stage false flag event there. Always great to have you on, my friend. You have the last word.
Well, thanks, Richie. And, unfortunately, I think truthjihad.com still has this virus warning on it. I get hacked. My webmaster says that there are some really high level, sort of NSA level people messing with my website, and also Professor Griff's website, which he also runs. So we're going to hopefully have that back functioning. Right now, I don't think you really probably want to go to truthjihad.com, even though I don't think it'll really mess with your computer, but you'll get a warning if you do. So instead, you might want to go look at my work at veteranstoday.com. Just go to Veterans Today and look at my rubric there. My last couple of books are We Are Not Charlie Hebdo, and the most recent one is called Another French False Flag, Bloody Tracks from Paris to San Bernardino. It's a great intro to the topic of false flags in general, as well as the most recent big ones. Hey, mate,
come back anytime you want. It's always great to have you on, Kevin.
Well, thanks so much, Richie. I appreciate your great work, too. Thanks.
Look after yourself. Bye for now. Kevin Barrett on the line to us there from Madison, Wisconsin.